Thank you for joining me. I hope you've had a really good week. Happy Hanukkah to those of you who are lighting candles as we speak. Well, you will be at the end of this program or before the end of this program when the sun goes down. Lots and lots coming up in today's show. The psychology of dehumanization. You probably haven't even thought about this, but when journalists, when people are talking about the other side, be it in politics, especially in war, there are very subtle and not so subtle words that they use to make those people seem other, bad, like calling the other side beasts or monsters or what have you, or aligning people with terrorist organizations so it makes it okay to hurt and kill. Now, I'm not talking about any particular country because everybody does it. We've got the renowned clinical psychologist. He's absolutely amazing, Sam Vaknin, talking about this, just this. And when it comes to words and what they mean, we'll also be looking at, talking again to our friend from Words Matter, how children, we can give them messages that make them conscious, aware, hate their bodies. With girls, it can be about size. With boys, and it tends to be mainly boys, about muscles. If you've been to the gym, and these people are absolutely, usually men, absolutely obsessed with bulking up and looking big and beefy. Well, it's a sign, it's a cry for help amongst many, many men. And it's often linked with childhood trauma. So we will be looking at that as well. Doctors over prescribing antidepressants. Love to know what you think about this. There's a whole report come out called Beyond Pills, what basically says what we tend to do in this day and age is a doctor writes a script for a pill rather than people actually dealing with what's behind their low mood. So a whole bunch of doctors, a whole load of psychiatrists have banded together to say to the government, we need to stop doing this. There's only one organization, if you like, only one slice of the world who's benefiting from the overprescriptions of pills. And yeah, you got it. It's Big Pharma. So we'll be talking to one of the main instigators of that campaign. And what if the word homosexual never really appeared in the Bible? So every time gay LGBTQ people are beaten up by religious texts, it's been done because what if in the 1940s, with the last translation of the Bible, somebody slipped up, put the wrong word in, and even maybe got Sodom and Gomorrah wrong? We'll be talking to somebody behind a film that explores just that with academics. Lots and lots more as well. But as usual, we start off every program with a look at the headlines. Joining me today, I love this guy. It's Dan Cullen-Shute, is CEO of Trisha, and he's going to be joining me. Let me just run through some of the headlines that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about how Boris Johnson's been told to stop wearing a Grimsby hat because he's, quote unquote, not my words, bringing the town into disrepute. Residents have been accusing the former PN of using the League Two club to, quote, I'm reading this, to, quote, add glamour to his own shattered life. So Grimsby, wearing a Grimsby hat is actually adding glamour to his own shattered life. Dan Cullen-Shute, CEO of Creature. Maybe we should be wearing one of these hats as well. What are your thoughts on this story?
Here we are again talking about Boris Johnson. This odious guff of a man, once again, just sort of snatching mortification from the jaws of immortality. I've got to say, I'm very much Team Grimsby in this. I think it's a sort of a cheap line to go, you know, God, when you have to resort to Grimsby Town, then you really are scraping. This is a proper football club there.
Hang on. You're going to get people from Grimsby. You might want to call in and challenge that because they're very proud of their team.
And rightly so. This is a proper club. It's a proper club. This is nearly 150 years old. You've got Bill Shankly, the one after Cloughy, probably the second greatest football manager of all time. Gary Birtles, Stone Cold Forest legend. He finished his career there. You know, they beat Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney's Wrexham in the playoff finals a couple of years ago. Like, this is real, and they don't deserve to be dragged into the sort of orbit of this guy. This pompous peroxide prat wearing their hat. I think, you know, the Mariners deserve an awful lot better than this. And I'd love to know why he's wearing it. As ever with this sort of thing, it looks like it's never been outside before. You know, that's not a hat that's well worn. It's not a hat that's been worn on the terraces. It's some sort of signal to somebody. But I just find it astonishing, because I think, you know, there is, you and I both know, there is one rule a politician should never break, and it's not, you know, tell demonstrably false lies in Parliament. It's not even allow a virus that is going to cause swathes of your natural voter base to die. It's don't get involved with football. Never get involved with football as a politician. Even Keir Starmer, a man who genuinely loves football, plays football, coaches football, when he starts to talk about football, everyone suddenly feels like they're watching a man who's never actually seen a football before, let alone any actual football. Yeah. And there's just no need. I don't know what he's trying to achieve. And it's just, as I say, the Mariners deserve a heck of a lot better than this. And I'm delighted to see them taking a stand against this bizarre co-opting of a great club.
A little later, we're going to be looking into his Boris Johnson's, testimony into the COVID inquiry. And the line that jumped out at me, that one of the things he said when talking about, they were trying to work out why COVID was spreading so rapidly in Wales. And he said he thought it was because of the obesity and the singing.
As a Welshman, a very proud Welshman, I promised myself, Trisha, I'd keep it light today, and we've still got to talk about Nigel Farage. So I may struggle, but I'm gonna. It's Christmas, it's Hanukkah, it's a time of light and happiness, and as much as I can, that is the world I'm going to remain in, and Boris can stay in his, saying what he likes about a nation that's not overly fond of him.
Okie doke, let's move on. She said, the whole bus trolley that is Omid Scobie's book Endgame. Apparently, the Dutch publishers of that book have hit back against Omid Scobie's claim. He wrote in the Eye. I read that article, and I was like, that's 5 minutes of my life I'll never get back. But anyway, he says he never meant for the names of the two alleged royal racists to come out, and that he basically is blaming the Dutch, and they've kicked the ball back into his area of the pitch. The whole thing, the whole headlines, to me, it's, well, I'm not going to use the word I used on Piers Morgan, but it really is a
You don't need to. I'm kind of with you. I mean, you said it. I don't think never has so much been written by so many about something so few of us should really have any time in our lives for. I think, you know, of all the things that yesterday I was watching some of the footage from Shane McGowan's funeral in Dublin, which was incredible, a genuine sort of nation and city coming together in the church at the ceremony, but then in the streets afterwards. And now here we are. I think I'm right in saying we're now in the third wave of publicity where he's denying the thing he explicitly said he didn't do. No, he's admitting the thing he denied in the second wave about the first wave. And as far as I can gather, the book is just the same as the other book. And I struggle. I mean, I'm not particularly, with apologies to my mum who's probably watching, and a particularly ardent royalist, but I have time for them. I think some of them are decent people. I think they have quite hard lives in ways most of us can't really understand. But why any of us should care about internal conversations around the next generation of a bunch of people who probably demand too much of our time and attention, I don't know. And it is one of those, it's, I think, one of the scourges of modern society that we now all know this man's name. And fair play to him. I guess part of his job is to build a story around himself. He's, very much become part of the story, and I suspect he'll be asked to do more stuff off the back of it. And dear God, there must be more. There must be more than this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it just keeps rumbling on and on and on. And even the people who might have cared in the first instance are like saying, you know what, there's kind of bigger things going on in the world
They have to
today.
be, right? They have
You
to be
know,
thinking that.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I am. Talking about politicians, and who knows, Omid Scobie may one day go into the jungle. That would be good.
The path is on.
Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage reveals he thought about women during that fatal plane crash. This is the time he was talking about it in the jungle. He survived a plane crash on Tuesday's night's episode of I'm a Celebrity, and he was asked by, I think, Josie what he was thinking of, and he said, "Do you know what I thought about women?" And Josie Gibson asked whether he meant the woman he was in love with, to which Farage replied, all that stuff, yeah, children obviously, and I just thought, let's hope this is over quickly. But she points out he said women, not just woman. And plus then he also talked about his life as an MEP, a little bit like a Love Islander would talk about a holiday in Dubai.
That's very nicely put. Again, keep it light. Professionally speaking, it's my job actually to be aware of stuff that's going on in popular culture, to spend time watching, and I'm very fortunate in that I genuinely love it. Like my Saturday nights are traditionally my last 3 weeks before Christmas involve a lot of I'm a Celebrity. I've watched Hancock, I watched Dory's in the Jungle, I watched Carol Thatcher in the Jungle. I haven't watched a minute of it this year. To be serious briefly, for me, Farage was a step too far. This isn't a kind of a politician I disagree with, because that's fine. I think we know each other well enough to know that I'm not absolutist about anything like this. But I think he's a fundamentally bad man. I think this is a man who is widely accepted to have, or certainly talked about as having taken Russian money. There is vast murkiness around where his sort of funding and his political allegiances come from. He has been in the middle of or next to an awful lot of bad things that have happened to us in the last decade as a nation and a world. He famously said on Brexit Day that Brexit had been won without a shot being fired, less than a fortnight after Joe Cox, a spectacular Labour MP, was literally murdered with a gun. And I struggle to imagine how I could have switched off and enjoyed Anton Deck's genuinely hilarious banter about someone who I think is truly unpleasant. So I have to say, I normally, as you know, do my research on stuff like this.
He's got a lot of fans, he's got a lot of fans. I mean, what I found, I find lots of things odorous, but when I wondered how even his fans feel when he was talking about after this plane crash, and I wouldn't wish... I have been in a plane crash, I have to say. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But he went straight back to work. He said he was back in the European Parliament. I shouldn't have been because I still had broken ribs. I'm the biggest name in the European Parliament's ever had in terms of international news that I made. I put them on the map globally. I said to them one Christmas, you should all be grateful to me. I've made you all famous. He talks about missing the theatre of being an MEP, talking about the amazing lifestyle, chauffeur-driven Mercedes, 300 euros a day spending money, diners, members' dining room, wonderful crab and lobster buffets every day. The UKIP table was often the noisiest because we all drank and had a laugh. I'm like, what were you actually... Maybe even the people who voted for you want to hear that, especially at the moment.
I find... It's one of the things I find genuinely inexplicable about Nigel Farage. And in some ways, kind of his greatest achievement is to be, on the one hand, so deeply and objectively unpleasant as a human being, and yet, on the other hand, to be so aggressively uninteresting. Like, he is a deeply, deeply boring man. I don't believe for a second he thought about women when he nearly died. I think this is Nigel, the ruddy legend, just cosplaying as a lad in the pub again. I can't imagine. No, but people do. People listen to him because the problem is this isn't just him prancing around, spending lots of money and living a high life. This is him, taking it back from the Europeans. This is him sort of making fun of the European Parliament and having a laugh in there. And I think, unfortunately, that is the one thing you have to give him is he's very good at this stuff. I like him or loathe him.
Yeah.
As much as the sort of terminally online love to mock his persistent local election failures, he is, I think, by a distance, the most influential politician of the last decade. And nothing is accidental, right? Like, I do know that within about a day of going on, he was talking about the percentage of screen time that people who get voted into the trials get. He is there for a reason. He is there to try and broaden his voter base. Young people don't like him as a general rule because they think, I don't know why, but they think he's a racist or a xenophobe or someone who wants to make their world smaller. And he's gone in there to show the world that actually, when all is said and done, he's just a good old boy who will down a pint of kangaroo testicles with the best of them. And my absolute terror is that it works. And this was kind of my issue. Like, I don't mind a light being shone on.
Well, maybe I was going to say, well, but I maybe it will work in splitting the vote when it comes to the Tories. I'm sure that the Tories will be every bit of, probably more nervous than anybody else because there's now been more talk about reform. I think he's confusing young people laughing at him rather than with him. But
I sincerely
people,
hope so.
Gen Z love him, but would they vote for him?
No, and if they vote anyway, I mean, I think there's a long-running joke at the moment about Keir Starmer having been sort of the one man who's got away with that. I wish for infinity wishes when he found the magic lamp, because everything's falling that way at the moment, and he's not really having to do much. The Tory party, led by the invisible Prime Minister, who's in a sort of anti-Thatcher cosplay, is not just turning but just spinning constantly, trying to please everyone, simultaneously pleasing no one. Farage, whatever game he's playing, is going to steal Tory votes. The polls are moving in but one direction. I think the fascinating thing is how much longer of this we have to put up with before we get to have a general election. I know, there's chat around May, but there's also in the last few days been people saying, I think they're going to hold on for as long as they can, which means a year, January. And it's sort of, this joke's not funny anymore as far as I'm concerned.
No.
And
I was going to say it'll probably take them a fair amount of time to write out the honours list, because that's the next thing we'll be discussing, the pages of honours list, the lords and ladies and all that sort of thing.
Dan, I'll come back in January
even though you're neither
outside.
Yeah, well, I won't ask you to sing, and you're certainly not obese. It's been despite being Welsh, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Dan Cullen-Shute, their CEO of Creature. You may or may not disagree with him, but that's the whole point of when we do the headlines. You get the headlines through a different pair of eyes. More coming up right after this. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me. Let me just remind you what we've got coming up later. We'll be looking at, according to one group, the overprescription of antidepressants. What do you think about that? Do you think that maybe you were given antidepressants when you didn't really need them, and now you're on them and you're psychologically sort of hooked on them? Do you think too many of us just... you take a pill for something. Do you think we've become too pill popping? I used to say to the kids when they used to come in and say, Mum, I've got a headache. I used to say, well, drink some water first. I used to give them alternatives. And then if all else failed, to take a tablet. I didn't want my kids reaching for a pill bottle at the drop of a hat. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that maybe we've become so scared of discomfort that we call it pain, be that emotional? Tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Julia Samuel, MBE, renowned grief specialist and psychotherapist. And one of the things that I know she's pretty hot on is the over-medicalization of grief. If you've lost a loved one, especially at this time of the year with Christmas coming up, it's seen as something, There's a pill for that. So there's my question for you. Do you think we over-medicalise the human condition? 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk to 87222, 87222. You can X at talkTV. Be really interesting to know your view on that for when I come to speak to our expert on just that issue. Do you think we over-medicalise what basically is the human condition? Things like grief, things like discomfort that we write off as pain. Do we reach for the pill bottle all too easily? Interesting to know how you feel about that. And anything else on the show? I know we've already got messages about what Dan Cullen-Shute said about Mr. Farage. Farage, what a biased, bitter guest. Libelous, bitter, Remainer, ITV thought they would expose him, and they have as a normal, quite nice person, but who's very aware that you can't beat him, bring right. Ha ha. And Oakley, sorry, Anne, if I've misread that. Farage, Dan from Kent, you say you're not an absolutist, Mr. Cullen, but you're making a damn good impression of one. Afternoon, Trisha. By the way, looking forward to the show. Thank you. Thank you. I think Dan's got you hot under the collar. But what I want to talk about now, we've got light and shade. So I'm giving you a bit of light before we get into that. And we've got some pretty meaty subjects coming up. What's going on in the world of showbiz? This being Christmas, there is a lot going on. And I like to keep you up to date with what's happening. Joining me, as usual, is Steve Denyer, who's Virgin Radio presenter. And I love talking with you, Steve. I'm waiting for you to start wearing the Christmas sweaters, but they haven't quite got there yet. On social media, I follow Rylan on social media, and I saw him in a clip with Cher.
Yes. Whoa. Yes, there's a big... this is going to be great. Tonight at 9 o'clock on BBC Two. I wanted to mention this because they're doing... It's kind of like a Cher takeover evening. It's all Cher, Trisha, for 3.5 hours. I'm not sure if you can see this in the States later, but I'll happily record it and send it over. I mean, where do you begin with Cher? Because it's interesting. Everyone has a favourite kind of Cher moment or a favourite era. She's got a 70-year kind of, singing career, which is amazing, isn't it?
How old is she?
So she is 77 now, but she started very early. She's been around for decades and decades and decades. Don't ask me why, but she looks younger now than she did in 1969. I don't know. It must be the fresh California air. But they have tonight. You'll see this great thing. It's Cher. So you got the interview with Rylan, which is very, very camp. It's lots of fun. It's everything you would expect. And the thing is, I mean, Graham Norton's spoken to me about Cher before. He says with Cher, what you see is what you get. You know, she's kind of ridiculously modest about her talents. And I think Graham once said he went to see her in Vegas. She did this Vegas residency, and she strolls on stage, does a 2-hour set. She gets in a lift, exiting the stage, goes up and just falls asleep. It's not a big deal. Cher is just Cher. She's just showbiz running through her veins.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. And I'm sure they'll show it over here. And then we can all share our memories of her. Now, they're going to be showing The Witches of Eastwick as well, which is one of my favourite movies. Now, what's Christmas, actually? That's in the theatre.
Yeah, it is. Something I'm going tonight, and I will report back to you. I just thought, what can I mention to Trisha about, certain productions that are bound to get you really in the Christmassy mood? So Richard Curtis, who directed, where do I begin? Love Actually, Four Weddings, Notting Hill, has put together a Christmas show. And from what I can make out, it features songs from these movies, poems read, excerpts from the movie, especially kind of movies like Love Actually with Christmas themes. And it's all going on tonight at the Festival Hall. I was just checking, there are tickets available and they're around 60 quid, but you get a 2.5-hour show. I'm going with a friend tonight. I just thought I need that moment, when you can go, I'm properly in the Christmassy mood now. And we're a couple of weeks, 2 weeks to go. So it looks interesting. I think there's going to be celebrity surprises later on tonight and different people join the stage on different nights. So I will report back, but I think everyone seems to be talking about it. It launched last night and it goes on until December the 11th, so a couple more nights of this all over the weekend.
Oh, Oh, now Willy Wonka. The reviews, it's had patchy reviews. I've read some pretty bad things about it, as well as lackluster things about it. I haven't really read any raves about it. I haven't seen it. It's not my cup of tea. There's been loads of publicity around it, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to have, maybe I haven't got kids the right age group to be going, but everybody's comparing it to the original.
Well, before I go into it, I saw it last night especially for you, because I thought I've got to come on and know what I'm talking about. Here's the trailer. Watch and listen to this, and then we'll pick up in a moment.
Okay.
Where is this? It's just weird.
What's happening? Who wants a chocolate that makes it fly?
Let's find out, shall we?
Who's for a hoverjob? Nothing to see here. Just a small group of people defying the laws of gravity.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Gallery Gourmet, my name is Willy Wonka.
So you probably saw quite a few different celebrities. In fact, this is a movie from the moment it starts. Your celebrity spotting. Rowan Atkinson's in it. I didn't even know, to be honest with you, that Olivia Colman would have such a big part in this movie. And she does. I mean, along with Timothée Chalamet, who plays Wonka, huge stars of this film. So here's the thing. Do not go in expecting a remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which we all, I grew up with that movie. I love that movie. I don't think, what do you think, Trisha? I don't think you can better Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You kind of almost have to leave that movie there.
I didn't even see that.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
I didn't even see that.
Okay.
No, not my speed, not my speed.
When I was growing up, it was one of those movies like Mary Poppins that you'd watch, when you were sick and school.
Oh, Mary
and stuff.
Poppins, yes.
So Wonka is the prelude to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So what they've done is they've gone into the Roald Dahl story and thought, OK, so this character, we know what he was like in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but what was his upbringing like? Who was he? What was his shared experiences? How did he get to hang out with Oompa Loompas? And by the way, Hugh Grant plays a two-foot mini Oompa Loompa with green hair.
Well, now that's what I read. Now that's what I read about.
Yeah.
That's what I read about. I read Hugh Grant saying that he hated playing that role. He only did it for the money.
Right.
That's not good publicity. And the other thing was, people said, well, why can't you have? There are lots of very famous small people who could have played that role. But I do think people will go and see it, not probably the age group it's aimed at, but because of the star Timothée Chalamet, they're all like about him.
Yeah. I mean, he's put in a shift over the last decade. He's been in all kinds of movies. I first saw one of his movies back in, I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago, called Call Me By Your Name, which is a brilliant kind of art house movie. So I would say that this is going to really, really break his name. He's going to be like a household movie star. He's great in this movie. He can sing well. He looks great. He's just got every kind of nuance. Every look is perfect. He's just got it, Trisha. He's got that star quality.
Steve, teenagers aren't going to care about that. They're just going to care that he's hot.
Yes, he's got they're going to care about his bum, and I'm a journalist. I've seen the movie. It's a lovely bottom. So there we go. It's a 10 out of 10 all round.
There's our Christmas peach right there. Spooning with Mark Wogan.
Yeah,
this is Terry Wogan's son.
It is.
Who's a foodie.
He is, yeah. This is a new podcast. I want to tell you about this because he was on with Chris Evans on his breakfast show with Cinch the other day here at Virgin Radio, talking about the fact that Terry Wogan was his dad, talking about this new podcast. It's a great little idea. He gets celebrity friends over at the Groucho Club to come in, and they bring in the food that they hate. So have you got a food that you really hate, almost like a food that you have a phobia about? Because mine's beetroot.
Well, I don't eat meat. I haven't eaten meat since 1981, so there's no way anyone would get me eating meat. But food I have a phobia... I don't know. Desserts that are so sweet, they make your face go inside out.
See, now I like those. They're my favourite, but that's the difference between us. But what Mark would do is he'd make up a dish and blindfold his celebrity guest and spoon feed them. That's why it's called spooning. And it really works. It's a really great... It's a love affair of food. Mark is a terrific interview. He's just like his dad, Terry. He sounds just like Terry. It's uncanny. So it's really good. It's called Spooning. Mark Wogan. The first guest is Tom Kerridge. And the first episode, I think it arrived on Thursday. So you can get it on our YouTube page, actually, Virgin Radio UK. You can watch it. Give it a go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Okay. It's got a lovely feel to it.
We've got a clip.
We've got a clip, actually. If you fancy seeing it, I didn't know if we've got time. Let's have a look.
What's the name of your rabbit? What's the name of your rabbit?
Cheese.
No! Hello and welcome to Spooning with me, Mark Wogan. Each week we are joined here in the Mount Street restaurant by a very, very special guest to challenge the food they think they love and the food that they think they hate.
So I'm in Soho with a blindfold on, trusting a bloke to put something in my mouth, yeah?
That's how it goes around these parts.
OK.
You've got to clean the meat before you start cooking it.
I mean, it's got a whole different connotation to it, but...
Now, you see, Trisha, if you just tuned in at that point, you'd be thinking, oh, my goodness, what is Steve doing to Trisha's show? It looks a bit untoward, but it's a really... celebrities being blindfolded, being spoon-fed. But it works, it really works. I was going to tell you about the other celebrities, but you saw Claudia Winkleman in the trailer, and she's coming up in a few weeks' time, and they've got the Hairy Bikers. There's a Christmas episode next week. So give it a watch. You might like it. And Mark is fantastic, it's got to be said.
Yeah, it does sound like his dad, doesn't he? Last but not least, Suede is playing in Eastbourne.
Now, this is going to be a loud gig tonight at the Winter Gardens in Eastbourne. When Suede came into Virgin Radio, into the building last December to do a live set, and it was so loud that all the books on the floor down below in HarperCollins started flying off shelves. People 10 floors see Madonna at the O2, and you know, if you've got a new phone, they kind of warn you about everything, and they're a bit like your mum telling you to turn music down. But I was getting these warning alerts every 10 minutes going, you really should step outside where you are because your hearing's going to be damaged if you stay there. It made me want to enjoy the gig even more. I'm so rebellious, Trisha. So rebellious.
Oh, well, I think I might have to take headphones for that. Steve, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
I'm guessing that next week you'll have your Christmas sweater on, will you?
I've got one ready for you. I bought it on in the week. I just didn't want to peak too soon. I thought we've got 2 weeks to go. So next Saturday, I'm going to over-deliver for you. Is that a deal?
Oh, that's a deal. That's a deal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Steve Denyer there, Virgin Radio presenter with what you can look forward to in the world of entertainment. Keep your messages coming in. Let me see that everybody's going on about Dan Cullen-Shute and his ideas around Nigel Farage. Hi, Trisha. I totally disagree with your guest regarding Nigel Farage. He's coming across as a totally pleasant man, not unpleasant, as he stated. Why does he think he's still there? Because most people agree that he is a rather pleasant man. I suppose he's a bit, don't they say he's a bit like Marmite? Love him or hate him. Coming up next, why words matter and how words you can use around your child growing up can actually have a pretty big impact on the way they see their bodies. That's next. Welcome back. A couple of headlines, recent headlines. One came out at the beginning of this month, talking about how, and it tends to be men, young men, can get into this cycle of becoming obsessive about building up their muscles. And it often links back to what they were told or feeling less manly when they were children. So they go to the other extreme to show how manly they are. The other thing that came out, there's been a major study that's come out, a major report saying now that coaches are banned from weighing gymnasts in new safeguarding rules. Now, when you read this report, It's children as young as 7 we're talking about, not allowed to go to the loo. And listen to some of the language. Let me just read. This is just part of it. Verbal fat shaming in front of peers. This is where coaches said many gymnasts reported inappropriate verbal communication about their weight or in front of others. For example, it was suggested that poor performance in a routine was because the gymnast was fat, or they were told not to wear certain leotards because it would make them look fat. Being called, and I'm reading from here, fat ass, you look like a whale, you look like you have a beer belly, your thighs are disgusting, you're spilling out of your leotard. Another female gymnast said reference would be made to her developing her breasts, being hit in the face with them. Now, we're talking about a young gymnast being prepared for the next Olympics. They also weren't allowed toilet breaks or allowed to drink water. They were weighed in front of their peers as well. And it might not shock you to find out that there is so many mental health issues coming around these gymnasts. And often, of course, when they're not good enough, they're kind of shelved and they are just left with a whole heap of eating disorders, all sorts of awful things. So the words that are used in order to get them to perform better through fear, through dread, usually ends up destroying them. Joining me now is Jessica Bondy, who's CEO of Words Matter, and is one of the Words Matter is one of the only charities, I think, internationally that actually makes us wake up and think about the words we're using, teachers to children, coaches, all of those areas. When you read that report, it's absolutely awful, isn't it, Jessica? I mean, some of the things that I read out there, these young, up to sometimes only 7 years old, we're hearing this, even if the parents didn't know, we're hearing this day in, day out during training.
I mean, I think it is absolutely shocking, and one has to realise this is verbal abuse. This belittling, critical, demeaning language is actually verbal abuse. It's not just it's harsh words, but it is abusive. And we know from all the science that verbal abuse can affect not only people's self-worth and their self-esteem, but can lead to these issues like eating disorders, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and even suicidality. And what was so sad is that one's kind of got two extremes. One's got those gymnasts or those swimmers, because there's another big report now looking at swimmers who have eating disorders, yet there's, at the other side, which is the guys who aren't told they're muscly enough or they're weak or they're small, and then they go the other way and they build up they bulk up because they're trying to seem more masculine. And I had one of the people I coached, it was a young guy who was told in school by his sports teacher that he was weedy, and his father was also saying how small he was. Yes, the father was pretty tall, and this guy hadn't kind of reached his growth spell. And there he was working out with weights at kind of 11, 12 and 13, which is quite a young age to start bodybuilding. So
and I think that's not unheard of, is it? And also with what they eat, because they then, by the words, oh, you're eating that again, and comments made about what they're eating as well. So they become very rigid in eating certain types of food.
Completely. And I think there are those that just focus on protein. There are those that kind of cut out all the other things, carbohydrates and other things that perhaps they should be eating. And I think what was interesting is when we talked to 1,000 children, 2 in 5 were experiencing these kind of words, these harsh words from adults around them. And these were words from parents, carers, teachers, and importantly, they were saying it was from activity leaders and sports coaches. And I think it's become common that these sorts of words are in those environments because they're trying to push people harder. And it was interesting, I recently watched, there's a new documentary with Peter Crouch, and how some of the words that we used to him when he was, he was lanky, he was tall, was he going to be a good football player, were critical about his appearance. And I think these sorts of things one believes these words are who we are. And particularly when you're a young person, and in the teenage years, when you hear these words and you believe them to be you, so they define you. So if you're told you have got fat thighs, or you need to lose weight, or you're too short, or your nose is big, or your bottom's large, you carry this with you throughout your life. And I met, you know, there's one woman who said to me, she was told at a young age she was not pretty. She is now 65, and she, to this day, has felt not pretty, and is wearing the equivalent of kind of sackcloth and ashes because she just feels very self-conscious.
Wow. I mean, you know, we don't think, and I think from the parents' point of view, we should point out, we're not talking about evil parents all the time or evil caregivers. It's just that we've never really thought about how we can condition kids. And for people who say, oh, well, kids are snowflakes these days, there are, as you said, that lady who was, you know, much older, lots of us are shaped by words that were used 50, 60 years ago. So it's something now we're aware of that we can avoid.
We can, because a lot of people are saying these things unintentionally. There's a small group that are probably doing it intentionally of adults, but the vast majority are saying it unintentionally. But as soon as they remember and think about what was said to them when they were growing up, it kind of resonates, and I'll think, oh yes, I do remember so-and-so saying that, and it made me feel so low and down and depressed. Whereas that one person who believed in me made me feel so encouraged and enthusiastic. Yeah. And we all want to be seen for who we are. And I think what's so sad about comments about the body is we cannot change our body. And that's why so many people either develop muscle dysmorphia, which was the study that was done this week, or those people go out and have surgery to, you know, make things look better, bigger, whatever, which I'm not, you know, there are some people that it can really help them. But it's so sad that because of these comments from adults in their lives, they don't feel confident in themselves. And all we want is, let's build children up, let's build young people up, not knock them down.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that if you've nowadays as well, we've got social media, sort of, you know, as a loudspeaker to a lot of those things. If you're hearing the same thing from parents or caregivers or teachers or what have you, and then you see it on social media, it reinforces that message rather than fights it. If you've got a parent who uses language that goes against what's in social media, the child will probably have a fighting chance.
Yes, I mean, I think social media just exacerbates everything, because you're shown these sort of perfect, idealized images, which aren't real life. And it's so wonderful when people show what they really look like. But it is very, very, very hard for people. But I think what was interesting is all these things that are said, and particularly when we looked at young boys and young girls from kind of 13, 14, 15, the teenage years, that it's the comments about body shape that are particularly hurtful. If one looks at a top 10 list of the most hurtful words to them, body shape is within that list. Either you're too fat or you're too thin. And it's those things that can lead to feeling humiliated, ashamed of their bodies, sad, depressed, lonely, which is so sad. And I think it's brilliant that this Gymnastics Association have now said that weighing shouldn't be allowed. And I think it's particularly around sports coaching and those being trained for extreme Olympics, it needs to be thought of about how the language that is used. Because I know that for some people, I was told I was useless at sport, and I've never ever felt confident ever doing anything, any form of gym. But I might have been, if I'd been encouraged a bit, I could have done something. But so many.
Well, actually, I was going to say, you make a good point, because I was always told I was absolutely useless at maths. Always taught by the maths teacher, and I think if it's somebody who you look up to as a child as the expert, i.e., a teacher or a coach, then it's even worse, because they know about that particular subject. That's their expertise. And it was funny, actually, when I did my chemistry O-levels, as it was called in those days, I got 100% in the maths part, and I couldn't believe it because I was more worried about the chemistry part. But, you know, the thing is, when it's somebody in a position of authority, like a coach, who can decide whether you win, whether you're in the team, all of those things, it's particularly damaging, especially when it's done in front of everybody else. I was cabin crew, and they used to weigh us in front of everybody else.
Shocking. I mean, I think it is, but so often in situations like that, it is one person who is singled out, and then everybody else can join in the conversation, and then you're so humiliated in front of your peers. I remember being singled out for being hopeless at spelling and being kind of shamed in front of the rest of my class. But I think particularly when you're training to be an athlete, or in these training to be a swimmer for the Olympics, or trying out for these different sports, it's particularly hard because actually you're there in the first place because of your skill. So you should be encouraged, not broken down. So it's very tough. But I think that the whole purpose of what we're trying to do with Words Matter is focus on the importance of language and really trying to bring an end to this verbal abuse of children and young people by adults. And I think that, on our website, www.wordsmatter.org, we do have numbers for people if they want to find help and resources we have available, really about guidelines on how to talk to children, or also those with lived experience that they can be supported.
Well, Jessica, I was going to ask you, how does a parent communicate, or somebody communicate, if somebody, you love your child, they genuinely obviously have a weight problem? I suggest then it's probably got something to do with you and what you're feeding them. But how do you communicate some of the realities of life without, there's a lot of parents or people in positions who are going to say, oh, we can't say anything, we can't, voice our concerns. Is there a way of doing that without, or is every word going to damage the child?
I think it's really about words that encourage and support. And I think one of the things that we have to realise as adults is we are role models. We are role models for young people. And if they see us talking to them with respect, they will respect themselves and others around them. I think the other thing is to focus on the positives and not always criticise and focus on the negatives, but particularly separate out the behaviour from the person. So it's sort of when you say you are lazy, it's defining, it's putting a label on somebody. Whereas rather than saying the thing that may drive you slightly crazy about their behaviour. But I think it is hard. And I think the other important message to remember is, as I said, so many people can say things unintentionally, but repair. An apology is a start. Wow. And I think that's the key thing to remember is you can break the cycle. And as so many people that are saying these hurtful things to children or young people have had them said to them themselves. And
absolutely. I was going to say that.
Your teacher was harsh to you, or your parent was harsh to you. It might have been because their parent was harsh to them. But it is possible to break the cycle and just take a step back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and just be aware of it. Words absolutely matter. Jessica, thank you so much for your time again today. Jessica Bondy there, founder of Words Matter. It makes you think, doesn't it? Makes you think. Let me tell you what's coming up with Joseph Kotrie-Monson. When we look at the legal roundup, we're going to be looking at Boris Johnson and his evidence to the COVID inquiry. Also, Will Guyatt, our tech journalist, deep fake pornography. There is a whole thing, apparently, you live and you learn when you do research for this show, called Nudify. I didn't even know it existed. Apparently some app you can point at somebody and somehow, AI-wise, it gives you pictures of that person without their clothes on. Yes, really. So we're going to be talking about that. And also we will be crossing live to Padstow in Cornwall, famous Padstow. They have a Christmas fair over there. And we're going to be doing this in the lead up to Christmas because I like highlighting things that local communities are doing. So we'll be crossing live to Padstow. Plus, of course, your calls and your messages, because later on in the programme, I'm going to be talking about the overprescribing of antidepressants. So you might want to get involved in that conversation. That and anything else you would like to talk about. So join me for that. But we're going to take a break. And as I said, right after this, Joseph Kotrie-Monson with our legal roundup. That's next.
The Vatican on the phone, they're saying that we've got to watch. That was the woke that was 10 o'clock on Saturday night with Lois Perry, Ben Lockname, Pete Barnes, and of course, Father Calvin Robinson and the woke wabbit.
Thank you so much for joining me. Do get involved in the show. We've had lots of lovely messages. We're about to do our legal roundup, and then we'll be talking about all things high tech and across to Padstow. You might have some questions for Joseph Kotrie-Monson about wills, because I'm going to be touching on wills today. And I was just talking with my producer, Carla, in London, and so many people have got so many questions to ask about wills legally. So I'm like, that's what we need to do on the show a little bit later. So that's some of the things that we'll be talking about. Let me just remind you, if you want to get in contact about any of the things we're talking about, 0344 499 1000, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk to 87222, 87222. You can X at talkTV about anything you'd like to talk about. And the first thing that we're about to talk about is the COVID inquiry. Joining me now for that talk, our roundup of all things legal this week, is Joseph Kotrie-Monson. Joseph, this is, with Lady Hallett, this is, it depends which newspaper you read, whether it's a witch hunt, whether it's a first, whatever. I mean, out of everything, as I think I mentioned to Dan Cullen-Shute, the thing that I picked out was that when Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson's testimony over his diary extract from Sir Patrick Vallance, his chief scientific advisor at the time, according to one entry, the former Prime Minister blamed high infection rates in Wales during the pandemic on the singing and the obesity. I mean, I'm like, all of this stuff coming out here. But let's talk from a legal point of view. This is pretty unprecedented, is it not?
Trisha, good evening. Good evening to viewers and listeners. The more I think about it, the more I can't escape the thought that this really is actually, and it'll probably be viewed as a pretty important event, certainly in the country's legal history. We've got a former prime minister here being questioned by leading King's Counsel. You know, this is a barrister who has represented the Queen in proceedings related to the death of Princess Diana. He represented Princess Anne in a criminal case in 2002, if you remember, when her dog bit somebody.
Oh, the dog.
This is one of the greatest legal minds of his generation. I have to say, purely from a kind of technical point of view and stylistic, it's been a joy to watch this. And I think probably the thing that strikes me the most is, although we did have Tony Blair in the Chilcot inquiry, do you remember all about Iraq being examined by counsel in that case? What wasn't the case was that all of these WhatsApp messages, diary entries, just shows that in 20 years, our attitude to the recording of our own data and what's expected in terms of probity and records is so much higher. And I've talked a bit about this kind of, I don't know if you'd quite call it cross-examination, because this is a public inquiry. It's not Boris Johnson on the stand, although it has a feel of it as these messages are being put to him. He's not being harangued and multiply cross-examined, but one gets the impression that in this kind of devastatingly polite technique of Hugo Keith, who's the counsel to the inquiry, not supposed to be partisan, helping for that information to come out in the best way. That's simply that process of document being shown, question being asked, answer, and move on to the next thing. You don't need to come back with multiple questions when, for example, in Boris Johnson's case, Trisha, you've got a situation where he may say, for example, with regard to those three, that combination of three terrible words together, let it rip, in relation to the to the virus. Well, he's saying, oh no, this was in common parlance. There were lots of people talking about this, and then rather than having to cross-examine him and say, well, you know, is that consistent? Again, this advocate puts to him another diary entry from a chief medical officer, another diary entry from a civil servant, again and again. Boris Johnson, can't we just let it rip? Can't we let it rip for a minute? I have to say, you know, this is not a criminal trial. The standards of proof are on the balance of probabilities with regard to its findings. But I don't even think that beyond reasonable doubt, when it comes to the findings of this tribunal, would have saved the Prime Minister from the former Prime Minister from the ignominy that naturally follows from these devastating WhatsApp messages. No wonder he didn't want to disclose them.
Yeah, we're not surprised. Let it rip, let it rip. I mean, and there were people demonstrating, weren't they, holding up pictures of their loved ones that they'd lost during COVID. And I understand that Lady Hallett had to sort of quieten people down. The feelings are running high about it. And as you say, when you keep hearing these diary entries, let it rip, these are real people's lives. These are real loved ones lost. So, you know, apparently Boris Johnson did get a little emotional at one stage.
Yeah, interesting. So there were a couple of moments. And first of all, in the kind of like one of those congressional committees that you imagine, isn't there a scene in The Godfather? You get to give that opening statement. George Galloway famously spoke for about 30 minutes with no notes, looking at his American inquisitors directly in the eye as he did it. Boris Johnson, first of all, tried to have a similar type of moment. And it was the point at which he raised, in the context of everything that we know, at the very best, I think, if you regard him as a man who acts in good faith. I mean, it's not for me to say either way, but if you regard him in that context, you can't regard him as a good manager of what was going on in his house. And I say that in the broadest sense. You know, you're head of an organization. In your house, things are run properly. They clearly weren't. It's a failure of leadership at the very least, isn't it? And the point at which he, at the beginning, starts talking about victims in the presence of their families. Well, how dare he, is what I thought. I thought he is there to assist, not to provide a platform for his own, you know, expunging of his, whatever you want to call it. And no doubt there were cries, and you can hear them not just as somebody is asked to leave, but in mutterings afterwards from people who have the restraint not to scream out. I have to say, I thought that was an undignified attempt to hijack proceedings. And it happened on a number of occasions, and it has, not just with him, but with all the politicians. Michael Gove, and I'd encourage anybody to get yourself on YouTube and look at some of the summaries and kind of reels, summarized reels of some of the cross-examination, the examination of witnesses, Cummings, you know, and any aspiring lawyer. Look at that Casey and his questioning. I just think it's masterful and understated. I'll keep going on about it. He's definitely in Joseph's books on that one.
I am going to have a look. I am going to have a look. Want to move on now to the UK strike laws, because as everybody's reading, they're talking about the junior doctors striking, their train strikes, and what have you. Now, Paul Nowak, who is the TUC boss, has called out these new laws. He says it's spiteful. These were passed in July in the wake of the biggest wave of public sector strikes for a generation. It allows the government to set minimum service levels to be met on strike days, and if the unions don't do that, they can be fined pretty heftily.
Yeah, so this was announced 10 or 11 months ago, as I recall. I think certainly Mick Lynch, also Whelan, one of the other union heads said, we are not happy about this. When this occurs, we'll be taking legal action. We already regard it as potentially unlawful. This is what was proposed and is now at risk of being enforced. Employers in England, Wales and Scotland, and I have to say I've cribbed a lot of this from it's interesting, we've just gone from Dominic Cummings and Castle Barnard. Here we have Dr. Catherine Barnard from Cambridge University, who gives an excellent summary on this. And yeah, basically employers will have the power to tell trade unions how many workers are needed to maintain something called minimum levels of service during a strike. But not just in the health service, also in fire and rescue, education. Okay, that's not necessarily about safety, is it? You can see they're trying to broaden it. Transport, nuclear installations. I think we get that, don't we? Border security as well. Now, the minister themselves has the power to make regulations as to what minimum levels of service mean. And I suspect if there's going to be legal challenge, it will be regarding that. But if a union then calls a strike, the employer, usually a government department basically, would send the union what's called a work notice saying these are the staff that need to come into work. And that does two things. If those staff, Trisha, don't come into work, not only is the union liable, fine of up to $1 million or thereabouts, but also the staff themselves aren't protected by the law that protects a striking worker. They can be sacked and have no recourse in the employment courts.
Wow.
The thing that unions are complaining about is this. We think, if you believe, the kind of the narrative that's in the centre and the centre right of our most news media, that we have particularly a virulent and kind of explosive culture of unions. Actually, in this country, I think with the exception of Lithuania now, most academics regard us as having the most anti-union, anti-striking laws. It's not regarded, as you heard me say, as in the past, that I think it probably should be a human right to withhold your labour. In fact, strikes are kind of de facto illegal in this country, or unlawful, with exceptions, provided lots of loopholes are jumped through. And we remember there was stuff to do with Clause 4, that Clause 4 period in the late 90s, when New Labour then were looking at themselves, kind of analysing their own position on it. And there isn't much difference between the left and the right. But I think what we're going to see is this. There will be an assessment after the next election as to what of this stays and what of it goes. When it was coming in, the unions were assured this will be repealed. I'm not sure, given what we know about Keir Starmer, who is a cautious character, I think, certainly in his approach.
Yeah, so you don't think Keir will repeal it? He'll look at he'll take bits of it. That's going to be an interesting one. Okay, just to finish off, and as I said right at the beginning, we'll probably do, because they were all chattering about it in my ear before, about wills. Processing of wills and probate, and how solicitors hold on to the money and delays, all that sort of thing. Hands up, I'm in that situation. My late dad passed away about 15 months ago in Norfolk. A small legal company. Well, we don't know what's going on because they just don't pick up the phone, no updates or anything like that. But when you look at their website and a lot of other websites as well, one of the big gripes seems to be from loved ones saying, why is this taking so long? Why is it? What's going on? Are you using the money? The escrow money. How do we know you're not using the money? It's a bit of a murky area as far as the beneficiaries and how much they know.
It's difficult. I mean, first of all, it's a difficult time to start with. It's an unpleasant club that you join when a parent dies, and you and I both went through it last year, as you know, Trisha. Yeah. These family dynamics surface. There's shifts. There's potential arguments. People eventually settle down, and that's all part of the grieving and the resettlement. But then you have these delays over money, and they're very common for a couple of reasons. I have to say some of them are structural, because the process itself is kind of inherently efficient. Between 6 and 12 months from somebody dying until money is divided and allocated. That's completely typical. Longer is also quite common. There are various things that a probate lawyer has to do, and let's give them credit for this, which are inherently time-consuming. Grant of probate from the government typically takes up to 6 months in itself, and anything else. And guess, and you know that's happened in this case, and guess which department's running that? HM, Courts and Tribunal Service. It's those same bozos who can't, or underfunded, let's give them, say, charitably. It's those same people who can't get criminal trials on, you know, and it's not the individuals, but as an organisation, it's a bozo organisation because it's not properly funded, because they, like everything else, as taxpayers, we bought the myth that there's so much waste in these organisations, we just have to cut them down and tighten our belt. You know, it results in chaos in criminal trials, but it also has this effect here. I should say this. There are also, for probate lawyers, difficulties sometimes in dealing with assets like property, calculating tax that has to go out to HMRC, and they're dealing with multiple beneficiaries. These are all bureaucratic and time-consuming because it's letter here, letter there, letter doesn't get replied to, chaser. What is never acceptable, however, and this is something that as a solicitor who wants good service for clients, because our job is to enfranchise people in murky and unknown areas. That really is the calling of being a lawyer. What's never acceptable is lethargy or non-communication from lawyers. Now, that is not the norm, but I have to say, in some sectors of the profession, the arrogance and the lack of oversight kind of can feature in a way that affects people's confidence in the profession. And I have to say, sometimes these criticisms, as may or may not be in your case, I don't know the facts, but sometimes these criticisms are appropriate. And I think part of it is this: when somebody dies, the will is the solicitor takes is held by that solicitor in a safe, usually as part of their will bank. In fact, when solicitors retire or solicitors merge or whatever, that is seen as an asset. And the reason for that is they'll often have taken the will down for free, but the work involved in getting the probate will eventually be worth some money. And it kind of, their motivation then, with that, in respect of that will bank, is to extract the maximum value if they're going to be cynical in the most efficient way, but if they're going to be really cynical in the way that benefits them commercially the most, irrespective of customer service. You know, you sometimes get, and this is not necessarily the norm, but I hear these stories and I know how some law firms work if they're operating according to chasing the money. And you know what? You can sack your lawyer if you get a sense of this and you're an executor, not if you're a beneficiary, but the person who's nominated the executor on behalf of the deceased, usually a family member, to oversee anything. So you don't have to take it if you can't get the answers back or if they're not answering phone calls. But the thing is, they hold that.
And as you say, I was going to say that's the most difficult thing when you don't, nobody knows what's going on because they don't answer emails or calls or anything like that. Thank you so much, Joseph. I'd love to do something on wills because we're hearing about what if you're not married and all those sorts of lots and lots of legal questions people want to ask around wills. So Joseph Kotrie-Monson there, looking at the week in legal terms. More to come when we look at high tech right after this. Thank you for joining me. A little while ago, I was talking with Jessica Bondy about the recent report on gymnasts and how they were fat-shamed and how they were treated and not given toilet breaks and what have you. Got a message here. Hi, Trisha. Thank you for talking about the gymnastics topic. I am an ex-elite gymnast, traveled the world. We were weighed every couple of days from around the age of 7. We were put on strict fitness programs, pulling tires down streets, and any gymnast that put on weight was fat-shamed publicly, told they wouldn't be a great gymnast, and called a pregnant duck. I made sure that I wasn't one of those that put on weight. We were seen by sports doctors who said we were all dehydrated, due to lack of water breaks. As an adult, I'm still self-conscious of how I look and what I weigh and feel terrible if I put on a couple of pounds. I am extremely careful of what I eat, even though I retired over 20 years ago. It does follow you through to adulthood. It is so damaging. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for getting in contact, because reading, reading about those stories is one thing, but, when you actually hear from somebody who's been through it, wow. So words and fat shaming really, really do matter. And for people who say, oh, well, if you want, that's what you need to expect. No. Why? Are you saying that's the only way people can be successful? Wow. Well, gosh, my heart goes out to you. Thank you so much for that message. And of course, if you want to contact us, 0344 499 1000. You might want to call about wills or anything that Joseph Kotrie-Monson touched on. You can text us at 87222. Just start it with the word talk, and you can X at talkTV. Do get in contact. Wow, that message is just like kind of blown me away. Let's talk about all things technical now. Joining me as usual is Will Guyatt, tech journalist. Will, there was something I think it was in the Daily Mail, saying I'm a professional hacker, and these are the 5 things that would allow this professional hacker to hack into your smartphone within seconds. Is that an exaggeration? Can people hack into a smartphone that quickly?
It's increasingly hard to do that. I understand why the Daily Mail have used that as their headline, and good evening to you, Trisha. There's some really good facts in that story. It's about keeping your device updated. It's about not using the same passwords all the time. It's about making sure that you download the latest versions of apps when you need to. Lots of things that would actually help a hacker break into a device, because lots of what happens if you don't keep the software up to date is that they find ways to breach devices through errors that just naturally occur, or things that hackers discover. And it's a constant, as we've said before, it's this constant game of cat and mouse now, and you've got to stay one step ahead of them. And if you don't keep your device up to date, you're actually making yourself at a greater level of risk than others who do.
And one of the things they mentioned is and we've touched upon this before, in places like Starbucks and other places like that, and in most areas now have free Wi-Fi, and there are dangers. I mean, yes, it's very handy to have that, but there are dangers in using free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there are concerns, and there are ways that you can be hacked or your device can be exploited when you're using one of those open networks. They're not as common as people tend to suggest, these risks that you may find. But if you are somebody who has got either a VPN on their phone, which is a virtual private network, and quite a lot of people buy them now so they can watch Netflix in a different country, or watch listen to talkTV if they're somewhere in a different country where you can't pick it up. So some people would use a VPN to give themselves a little bit of extra protection if they're using a public or a free Wi-Fi service. But I find myself these days being in a situation that I probably would, if I'm using a device on public networks and public Wi-Fi, it's not typically a device I've used to access my bank accounts or those kind of things. I'll just use it to keep in touch. It's always that risk. You've always got to play off that risk. And if it's like, let's say, for example, even if you go to a hotel or something, there could be an unscrupulous individual involved in any process, and there is always potentially a risk when you're using. Making sure you've got like a virus checker on your device to make sure nobody is trying to do anything, or put malware, etc., onto your phone or to your laptop. That's a really wise place to start. It's always really annoying when people talk about, make sure you get your virus checker or whatever, because ultimately that's only giving you one element of protection, because these days most of the leaks actually come from the other end. They don't come from your system or from problems with your device. It's when a company loses vast amounts of data, and that's what and that's nothing. You've done nothing to cause that.
Yeah, and that leads us very nicely into our next subject, and that's 23andMe. And I have to say that I'm one of those people that have done, for people who don't know, it's a genealogy site. You sort of put your saliva into a tube, you send it off. It gives you, tells you who your relatives are for extra money. You can tell what illnesses, so it gives you the whole area. Well, apparently, dark web criminals have got into there. The Anne Wojcicki, if I've said her name correctly, Silicon Valley, she's the head of that, of 23andMe, or she put that together. So her religion, in that she's Jewish, was apparently mentioned. But the concern was that 23andMe, I think, initially said it was, 14,000 people who were hacked into. It turns out it's a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, it's over. I think it's over 6 million, isn't it, or something? I believe that's potentially risky. One of the things that was most worrying about this, Trisha, was that the information found on the dark web had suggestions that we've got loads of data about leading Zionists and all sorts of other, very race sort of generated anti-Jewish sentiment, in the suggestion that there was going to be loads of data about feeding the Jewish conspiracy, as you were. And that was one of the things that was really concerning about this whole leak, is that what information have they got about you? What information have they, if it's almost like, this is going to sound terrible, if they've got your address and your bank details, that's probably not as harmful to some people as genetic information or information about anything else that they've managed to get from you from that saliva sample. And it just goes to show that our data now is so valuable to other people. And no matter how many times I tell you to change your password or keep your phone up to date, if companies at the other end are not doing the same thing by keeping your data safe, there's very little you can do. And it's, it's getting to a stage now where I'm being brutally honest. I think it's part of doing business on the internet that your data will end up with people you haven't suggested it will go to. Some of that by hacking, and some of that by the fact that companies have got written into their contracts that they can sell your data to who they damn well like.
But also, with this particular case, I didn't realize that often when hackers, I suppose it makes sense, when hackers attack a particular site, they're not successful straight off. They keep trying, and that should flag up to a company that somebody's continuously sort of knocking at the door. And in this case, 23andMe, that the reason that people are suing them, one of the many reasons, is that they say, hang on, you ignored that. So hackers don't do just like in the movies where they go, yep, we're in. They'll keep trying and trying.
Well, and what normally happens actually is there'll be this kind of like little bit of disturbance very visually for the company involved. They'll be, somebody's attacking our website. But at the same time as they're being attacked via the sort of the front door, as it were, there is somebody somewhere else trying to get into the rest of the website. And that's what happens in some of these cases, whereby companies think, we've got a problem over here, we'll get all of our cyber team over here to deal on it. There's another part of their site or a service or a connected database or something that's being attacked. What you actually get to in a situation like this is companies just need to get better at being honest and communicating when they can. But many companies are nervous because if you're a publicly traded company and you don't give people the right information, that's another way you can be sued. But on the opposite side of that, if you're a customer, I think there was an issue a couple of years back with BA, and they waited something like 9 months to tell people that the site had been breached. I would have appreciated, as a BA customer, a notification as soon as they knew that my data could be at risk, rather than once they'd completed the full extent of their investigation. So companies need to get better at telling us. I think companies need to also put better mitigation in place. Like in the US, it's very common for credit checking services or etc. to be offered to customers. So if there's a hack, you would be able to see, if you were in the US, that somebody has accessed your bank account and that sort of stuff. Doesn't always happen that way in the UK. You just get, we're very sorry, go change your password. But they're not necessarily offering the help and support afterwards to make sure that your data hasn't been compromised in a way that could really affect you.
Now, Rishi Sunak was making a lot of noise about, Britain setting up the new world sort of police unit, if you like, for AI. I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek. The EU has agreed to an historic deal with the world's first laws to regulate our AI. This is an agreement between the European Parliament and member states, and it's going to govern artificial intelligence. How do they do that? Because artificial intelligence has no borders. So,
the whole thing,
you can make all the laws you want in one country.
Yeah.
It's like, duh.
Yeah, and then North Korea are not going to sit there and listen to any of the suggestions about the ethics of AI. Everybody wants to be the world leader in AI at the moment, Trisha. That's the honest example here. And do you want to know the first people that actually put governance into place? China, the people we attack all the time, saying they've, their values about tech and stealing ideas and, information from other people. It was actually China that put some guiding principles into place about how AI would be used in China, operated, how it would maintain safety, how they would maintain control over it. So the fact that something like that is coming through in Europe doesn't surprise me. We're going to see something similar from the US. But even in Europe, you've currently got Germany and France both competing to be Europe's home of AI. You've got the UK saying, hey, we're a small country, but Bletchley Park's here. Come and do AI in the UK. And we've had some success.
Historically, look at the history.
Yeah, but that's what happened. That's how they dragged everybody to that incredible scene of Bletchley Park for the AI conference. Elon Musk went to Milton Keynes. I can't see any other reason why Elon Musk would ever possibly want to visit Milton Keynes. So
the land of the concrete cow.
Yeah, exactly. But what I think every country in the world is trying to get investment, trying to get companies to spend their billions of dollars on AI in their country. But at the same time, governments are also trying to encourage people like you and I that our jobs aren't going to be lost and we're not going to be replaced by a computer, even though they're not going to really be in control of the reality of whether we are or not.
Yeah, it's all, when I read that, I was like, I'm sure those countries are going to say, oh, it's Europe. We have to,
exactly.
We're sending out this signal, but it can't go any further than France or Germany. Nudify. Listen, when I research stories to bring up with you, I learn so much. Explain to our good viewers and listeners what Nudify was. I didn't even know about deep fake pornography, innocent little goldfish that I am. What is Nudify?
I'm in a room where both my 5-year-old daughter and my partner are sat. So I'm going to make it clear that I've never actually used Nudify or tested Nudify on the internet. But for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, the idea of Nudify is that you can put a picture of anybody into this system and it will create an AI-generated nude of that person, which is, talk about you can sit here and chortle and chuckle, but it feels a bit like a pervert's charter to me, if I'm honest. I'm not really a big fan of this. This is something for, teenage boys and people who don't go out enough, I think, is to be...
Yeah, people in greasy racks. But apparently, if TikTok has blocked the keyword undress because it's the use of those apps have increased more than 2,500% on social media and X and Reddit. So it's non-consensual photography. So they can take a photograph, am I right, of a real person and then create an image of them being nude. And I'm guessing if they chose to send it, I'm thinking of blackmail, I'm thinking of abuse, the person you wouldn't know. All of those things you wouldn't know. You would actually think it was a nude.
And that's what, thankfully at the moment, they don't look particular, and I have Googled for research just to be clear, that they don't actually look particularly accurate right now. But you do find yourself in a situation where we've got a government in the UK working really hard with charities and organisations to fight revenge porn, etc. at the moment. It's a real serious and growing problem. To have an app like this is just, it's that kind of lowest base denominator. It exists in every, every time there's new technology. Like a really good example is virtual reality. Virtual reality has got many good uses, but you can find places on virtual reality where you can go to virtual brothels. I mean, I find nothing worse than the idea of, wearing a headset and going into. So, but it's like, I think sex sells. I don't mean that in a in a kind of tabloidy way. I think the reality is there are some companies here who thought we can use this AI technology to meet the needs of various nerds who have got fantasies about actors or neighbors or whoever else, and we can make some money from it, ignoring the morals entirely. Apps like this shouldn't be allowed, and hopefully in the future, when you get to a situation where AI essentially governs this technology itself, we might find ourselves in a position where apps like this can be blocked or banned. And companies like Apple and Google, who run the app stores, should be stopping the use of this kind of stuff, as far as I'm concerned, because it just causes problems. It causes huge problems globally.
Well, and we've got all of these policing groups, you know, one now in Europe, one in the UK. That might be the first thing on their list.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah. Do you see me holding my breath? Will Guyatt, thank you. Always a pleasure catching up with you and finding out what the latest in tech news is. Will Guyatt there. After the break, a really special Christmas treat when we will be crossing live to Padstow in Cornwall. Don't miss it. Well, getting into the Christmas spirit, one of the things we're going to be doing is, and I love doing it, is crossing live to various communities. Today, we have the pleasure of crossing live to Padstow in Cornwall, where they have a Christmas festival. And so let's see if all the tin cans and pieces of string work. Hello, Padstow. Can you hear me? I think Tina Evans, who is the Christmas festival founder there, should be at the other end of the line. Tina, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Trisha. Hello, how are you?
How are you? Now, where are you? It looks like, is it a pub you're in?
I am in the Old Ship Inn in Padstow, yes. We're just having a quiet drink and a chat here in the corner, having had a really good day at the festival. So, yeah, it's been really good. We've had lots of people and lots of interesting chef's demos. It's been brilliant.
So it's been going since the 7th. It's over on the 10th of December. So tell us, what is it all about? For people who know zero about the Padstow Christmas Festival, what can they expect?
We have a wonderful lineup of chefs that come along and demo for us. I have Michael Keynes here from me from Livingstone Manor, who's one of our star chefs, and he's just done the most amazing demo this afternoon. But we have cookery demonstrations Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And we have a huge array of very talented celebrity chefs and also some very, very great local chefs as well that promote everything we do in the West Country and Cornwall. We also have a huge Christmas market. Sorry.
Oh. So, I was going to say, I also noticed, I don't know. That's all right. I noticed you've also got drinks there, lots of different local distillers.
We do have, and on my right-hand side, I have Nick from Sharks Brewery. Sharks, who are our main sponsors, and our local brewery from literally just across the water here. So we work in very, very close contact with Sharks, who we're all enjoying a really nice pint of June bar after a very hard day at the festival.
Yeah, we've supported the festival for about 10 years now, and we're just across the estuary over in Rock, so we're in Padstow here, and it's just a short ferry ride across to our brewery. And we absolutely love the festival. It's just an incredible mix of ingredients, I guess. The natural environment of Padstow is incredible already, and the sort of Rick Stein factor has meant there's this incredible plethora of chefs in the Southwest, and then just great producers have sprung up around it. So we're making beer, there's people making gin, and we just love collaborating together on this festival.
So how long has it been going? I mean, not this time. I mean, how many years?
This is our 16th year, so a while. But we started very, very small, and it's sort of grown year on year to where we are now. So yeah, it's been quite impressive, I have to say, and very exciting. And it evolves every year a little bit, so there's always something fresh and new to look at.
And I understand yesterday Santa arrived.
He did arrive by train, which was exciting. And we had a huge lantern parade with all the local school children. We had over 120 lanterns parading around the quay, and yes, a very, very exciting evening, finished off by an amazing display of fireworks. So very much a community event last night.
And I will say, Tina's very
about
modest. Tina's very modest, so Michael and I can talk her up. But the festival is run mostly by volunteers, and it's now one of the best Christmas festivals in Europe, and probably has the best lineup of chefs of any festivals in the UK. So they do an incredible job here down in Padstow to deliver such a beautiful event.
And I think what's special is that relationship with Rick and the family Steins. All the chefs turn up. We give up our time for free to support this amazing event, which really brings a lot of benefit to the community in the wider area of here in Cornwall, which is great. I mean, some of the best chefs in the UK give up their time to be a part of this, so it's very, very special.
No, it sounds it. Now, a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned the lanterns with the children. Do the children make those lanterns in the parade?
They do make the lanterns. They have a couple of projects. The schools themselves build a big one, which we, they represent the schools. But we actually started a new category this year where we gave a prize out to the best individual lantern created by a young person, child. And we had the most amazing entries. And the one that won was very, very special. And the young lady from Padstow, who's 9 years old, who won it, she was absolutely over the moon. And the cheer and everything she got when she collected her prize was phenomenal. Very, very special.
And you've partnered up with the Prince's Trust. That works?
Yes, we did this year. I have to say the Prince's Trust is one of my favourite charities because they do such amazing work with young business people who maybe haven't got the money to actually promote their products or set up their business. They mentor them, and I didn't know until this event that all the Prince's Trust mentors are all volunteers. They're all business people that give up their time to mentor these young people to help them to produce their businesses. And the response they've had at the festival from the visitors has been absolutely amazing, and they are just blown away by the support they've had, and so are the Prince's Trust. So it's been a very, very meaningful and worthwhile collaboration this year.
That sounds lovely. I've got to ask you, what's behind you? It looks like lots of toys, or am I going nuts?
So this is one of our customers, the Old Shipping. And they're a credible family business. They're always thriving in Padstow. It's always the place to come for a pint after an incredible meal or to have a meal here. But they're collectors of toys as well. So it does feel a little bit like we're in the ultimate Christmas tree surrounded by toys at the moment.
Definitely.
Oh my gosh. I was going to say my husband's grandchildren would go absolutely bananas. They'd go. I'm just noticing. I was like double-decker buses and everything else. So what is well, can you imagine? Sit, don't touch. Oh, good luck with that one.
It is actually. They're actually very special and collectible.
Ah, okay. You can't chuck them about. What's coming up tomorrow? Tomorrow
we start off with actually the chef's celebrity breakfast, where we invite people to come along and they pay for their ticket, and then our celebrity chefs come along and talk to them and sign books and have photographs taken with them, and all that money goes into the pot for the local charities. So it's a very special event to kick off tomorrow with. Then the next demo is Richard Bertonet and Valentine Warner, with a member of the Prince's Trust, a young baker who's very up and coming, and he's actually going to be on stage with them. And then we've got Matt Tebbett and Sam White from Fortnum&Mason. And then we go into
Chris McClure. Yeah, number six, which is Paul Ainsworth's restaurant. So yeah, a few local heroes and amongst the national chefs there.
Wow. Now, just tell me, with all of this food and what have you going on, I mean, do people pay to come to the festival, or do they pay for individual demonstrations? How does that work for people who want to come along tomorrow?
The demonstrations, what we do is we charge £5 a day, but you can see any one of 7 demonstrations. So you basically come along, you buy your day pass, and then you can visit any of the demonstrations you want to see. So it's a nominal charge, but because we're a not-for-profit organisation, obviously we have to pay for the event. So we have to raise bits of money here, there and everywhere just to be able to, obviously pay for all the equipment and kit that we have to have on site.
The Christmas market is completely free to attend, and there's local chefs to see in there as well. So you can do that if you prefer.
Wow. And you can buy, what, ornaments and things? You mentioned the Christmas market. So can people who haven't, or because I mean, I love a Christmas market. Do they have the usual, the baubles and the Christmas tree things and food and goodies?
A lot of food and drink, I have to say, and all from local suppliers. I mean, there's a huge choice of products and produce to and lots of lovely craft things and business. We've got some ladies here this year that have a sheep farm on Bodmin Moor, and they've got a lot of natural fleeces and absolutely beautiful and all handmade. Wow. So we have lots of very, very diverse things. So there's something for everybody, and I do hope people will come along and enjoy it.
Well, because most people think of Cornwall, they think of cream and cheese and butter and what have you. I mean, that's the first thing that springs to mind. Is there lots of lovely cheese there?
Yes, lots, and very, very good cheese as well. We have David Stowe Cheddar, who are one of our sponsors, and they produce some amazing local cheeses, 24-year matured cheese that I know the chefs all like their matured cheese and use it. It's very special and definitely worth trying and buying.
Yeah, and definitely don't drink and drive. And just, here's something. I mean, where they gone? That was one too many drinks. Still there. I was going to say, one of the things that Americans do not get, they do not understand, is the good old Christmas mince pie. They don't understand. They think it's mince meat. they just don't get it. I bought a whole load for Americans here. So tell me, have you got lots of lovely mince pies? I mean, I love a good mince pie.
There are two absolutely fantastic local bakers who've got stalls, and they've got oodles of mince pies, and they are absolutely beautiful, and they're all homemade near us in Padstow, and they are absolutely wonderful. So you'll have to send the Americans down to us.
And tell them to make sure they put some clotted cream under the lid. That's the way to go.
Oh, so how do you do that? What do you do?
On top or under?
Under the lid.
Oh, yes. Good idea.
Under the, really?
A wonderful pint of sharks. Brilliant. Here we are.
So hang on. With a mince pie, you're meant to what? Take the top of the mince pie off and then put some ice cream on.
Yeah.
Clotted cream, yeah.
Oh, clotted cream.
Very thick cream.
Clotted cream.
Put the hat back on, grab yourself a beer, and it just goes perfectly together. Yeah.
Oh, make notes. I'm going to try that out. Not very good for the wasteland. So it finishes, what, tomorrow is the last day?
Yeah. Yes,
tomorrow's the last day. Then there's the... But it must generate a lot of goodwill, a lot of money, a lot of, keep the town alive. It must be really good for local craft makers to have people from all over come and taste their wares and learn about what you do so well in Padstow.
Yes, it is. So it does provide a huge amount of income for local traders and also for Padstow as a town. A lot of the retailers and the restaurants and that struggle a little bit in the winter, obviously, because we're very tourist-based here, but they all feel that the Christmas festival actually knocks the business on into the new year. So it means that the break is a little bit shorter for them, and this provides them with a real much-needed boost at a time of year when it would normally be quiet.
Yeah. It sounds lovely. So, Tina, you've been behind it. As you say, you're the quiet hero there working away at it. It sounds like something that is absolutely amazing. It'll be on next year for anybody, I'm guessing, who's missed it. They can book in to come now. I'm sure the hotels are all full up, so you'd have to book well in advance, wouldn't you?
We do get people booked year to year, I have to say. Yes, they do.
Woo!
I've met
got my name down. Thank you so much, and cheers.
Yes.
Well, I know. I said actually, my husband's a foodie, and I said to him, "Well, there you go. There's an idea for a future Christmas. So I might get to try out that mince pie with the clotted cream underneath after all." But thank you so much. Cheers.
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 Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Yeah, Merry Christmas. Cheers.
Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you. How great is that? Padstow Christmas market. And that's what I like doing, taking us outside the boundaries of London, having a look at different communities and what they're doing to, excuse the pun, raise their spirits. Coming up, oh, we've got some messages. A message. Christmas, very good evening to you, Trisha. I, too, love to hear festivals happening in a particular area of the country. The one in Padstow, Cornwall, sounds super. The historic fishing village of Mousehole, also in Cornwall, also holds its very own Christmas festival, which includes traditional music. It's really lovely. That's from Susan. So please, 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 if you know there's a local festival going on, get in contact with us on the same number, 0344 499 1000, and we'll do a live cross and promote it for you, because this is the time of year when local businesses need all the oomph they can get. And wasn't that lovely? Padstow there. Let me tell you what's coming up. There's a number on the screen if you want to get in contact about anything. We're going to be looking at the over-prescription of antidepressants, how language is used to basically make the world see the population in terms of us and them. It as particularly happens during wartime. We'll be doing that. And also, maybe the word gay or homosexual was never really meant to be in the Bible. We'll be talking to somebody who's made a documentary about the latest translation of the Bible and how maybe it was got wrong. All of that, plus your calls and your messages right after this.
Oh my goodness, that was the Vatican on the phone. They're saying that we've got to watch That Was the Woke That Was, 10 o'clock on Saturday night with Lois Perry, Ben Loughnane, Pete Barnes, and of course, Father Calvin Robinson and the Woke Rabbit.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining me with a really packed last hour. A little bit later on, we're going to be looking at the over-prescription of antidepressants. I asked you earlier, do you think we've tended to, or ended up in a situation where we medicalise every bit of the human condition? One group thinks so, and I will be talking to somebody behind the research that suggests that antidepressants are over-prescribed. Also, was a mistake made in a translation of the Bible that has led to really anti-LGBTQ and the demonizing of homosexuality. An interesting film from a filmmaker who's done a lot of research and talks to a lot and has had a lot of pushback about this, but it's an interesting one. And as you know, I like to get you thinking. And this next issue absolutely will. I mean, I love it when we have this guest on because he absolutely makes me think. He pushes the boundaries of where you want to go in safety. You know, we always go for the lowest hanging fruit of ideas, and Sam Vaknin absolutely stops. I think he stops that happening. Now, if you've seen online and in newspapers those photographs of lines and lines of Palestinian men being huddled together naked, the UN has spoken out against this, but the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have said, no, these are all Hamas fighters. That unraveled when somebody in the States saw that his uncle, or a relative who was a baker, and a 13-year-old, and a newspaper saw one of their journalists. Anyway, long story short, 4 of the people were already identified as having nothing to do with Hamas. But what it does is dehumanize the others. And there's lots of ways, all sides in war, dehumanize the other side to make it more, quote unquote, acceptable for politicians, for generals, for et cetera, we have to attack these people. And they use terms that equating these people to beasts and animals. Sam Vaknin is fascinating on this subject, and I'm delighted to say joins me now. Sam, thank you so much. Just doing some research, research behind what you're talking about really made me think again. Let's talk about some of the ways in war that one side seeks to dehumanize the other and why.
Always happy to see you, Trisha. Just for fairness' sake, the Israeli Defense Force claims that they had to strip these men because they suspected them of possessing weapons or carrying weapons. We'll leave it aside whether these men should have remained stripped and naked for hours and delve right into the topic that you have raised. Now, war is a very interesting phenomenon because it brings out the best in us and it brings out the worst in us. Where war has been identified for millennia with masculine positive values, such as valor, heroism, courage, overcoming fear, selflessness, altruism, self-sacrifice for the greater good, and protectiveness. These are all absolutely positive values in an unmitigated, unadulterated way. But in order to emphasize all these elements of humanity, this is what makes us human. In order to emphasize them, we need to render the other side a bit demonic. And this is a defense mechanism, a psychological defense mechanism known as splitting. Splitting or dichotomous thinking is when we cast the world in terms of good versus bad, evil versus good, black versus white. We are all good, the enemy is all bad. So this is known as splitting, and the enemy is dehumanized, objectified, and demonized in a kind of morality play. So the war becomes a kind of a theater production where there's the bad guy and the good guy, the all bad guy and the all good guy. And of course, we are always the good guys. We are never, ever the bad guys. Now, this is a kind of, it's a kind of role play. If you give me two additional minutes, I want to elucidate a few points. This is a kind of role play. It's adversarial, it's rule-based, but it's a game. You know, when you watch veterans on both sides when they meet after the war, they are very convivial. They're very cordial.
Yes.
They're like best buddies. It's exactly the way athletes shake each other's hands after a contest or something. So there's a strong element of game or gaming or role playing in war. Still, war is about winning. And it's about winning because winning validates you. It validates you as having been chosen. It validates you as having been blessed. Those of you who believe, having been chosen or blessed by God. And, you know, it's very awkward to mention it in this context, but the Nazi SS had an inscription on its buckles and on its daggers. And the inscription was, Gott mit uns. God is with us.
God with us.
God is with us. God with us. Yeah. So winning the war means that you have been chosen and blessed by God's grace. You've been elevated by God. It's a bit of a Protestant thing, because Protestants used to believe that if you were successful in business, if you were a moneymaker, that meant that you were chosen by God. You were blessed by God. The same applies to war. War is
I was going to say I was going to say as well with politicians, though, in order for them to get the money for war, in order for them to validate their decision to go to war, to validate the actions that they take, they need you not to see the other side as humans who bleed, who cry, or what have you. They need their constituency to see the other side as either good or bad, subhuman, and also equate the people with the terrorist organization. For instance, all of the, and both sides have done it when we talk about what's happening between Gaza and Israel, that they all must be this, for instance, they said the settlers, all of these settlers, they're not really settlers, Israeli settlers, they were really IDF. Or all of those men we stripped, they're all Hamas. And there's that equating ordinary everyday people with the boogeyman, the monster, which then makes it okay for destruction to take place.
I think it's great that you raise the issue of politics, because I think war is a collective cultural, social activity. War is a great way to bond. It creates bonding. War is a great way to foster intimacy among large swaths of the population. War gives rise to identity, which is often what we call in psychology negative identity formation. It means my identity is everything that you are not. I'm defining my identity in contradistinction and in contradiction to who you are. We both are mutually exclusive. And since I regard myself as human and all good and on the side of God and ethical and moral, you must be the opposite, because my identity is the exact negation of yours. So there's bonding, there's intimacy, there's cooperation, there's innovation. War is the greatest engine of an innovation. Literally all the technologies we use today have been invented during wartime or by military organization, and that includes the internet. So this is war. And it's very important to understand that war leads to a new order. War is very cathartic. It's a catharsis. It cleanses. It's kind of a cleansing operation, after which there is an opportunity to create something new. For example, I think the current conflict between Israel and Hamas will finally give rise to a Palestinian state. I think
Oh, you do?
I do. I think the Yom Kippur War in 1973 was a prerequisite, was a precondition for the peace between Israel and Egypt, and later the peace between Israel and Jordan. We need war as an engine of transformation. Schumpeter, the famous economist, called it creative destruction or creative disruption. Now, it's very politically incorrect to talk about war in these terms as a positive force.
Yes, I was going to say. But do you think... No, I was going to say, but the language as well that is used. Let's talk about the language, because that's frequently used by newspapers to promote that otherness as well, calling the other side beasts or monsters. I mean, just looking at the brief that you gave me, and then I look at the newspapers, and the scales fall from your eyes when you keep reading various reports from various different sources and the various words that are used to equate the other side with animals. I mean, the remarks you hear will be like, oh, well, the Gazans were just living in like animals, in the desert. They weren't very developed. There is that belief against that the more civilized, in Western concept, the more civilized the society, the more, I don't know, closer to God, or they'd be doing the other person a favor. Of course, I'm going to be very sensitive to that, because Africa was taken over by people who saw everybody in Africa as savages and need to be educated. And we all know that, God forbid, when the bomb goes off, we know who's going to, the most civilized people will go first. So let's talk about the language that is used to demonize the other side.
War and the language of war has to do with a fantasy space. War is a fantasy defense. In war, you as an individual become immaculate, become perfect. I opened my conversation with you by mentioning all the values associated with war: heroism, courage, protectiveness, selflessness, altruism, self-sacrifice. These are positive values. None of them is negative, not a single one of them. So there's a fantasy of who you are, which is what we call in psychology a narcissistic fantasy. And this fantasy of the individual as a perfect being protected by God, in effect. Even the SS, the Nazi SS, believed themselves to be protected by God. So under the banner of God, you're a perfect being, and obviously a society comprised of perfect being also happens to be a perfect society, a city on the hill. Now, you mentioned Gaza, for example, and this is an excellent example of how fantasy takes over reality and suppresses it. Gazans have the highest literacy rate in all the Arab world. Gazans are much more literate and much more highly educated than the Egyptians or the Saudis. So Gaza is actually an enclave of learning and erudition in the Arab world. They're definitely not uneducated peasants, or they're exactly the opposite. They are urban. Most of them are urban. So here's an example of how we create in a fantastic space an image of the enemy that has nothing to do with reality, that is counterfactual, and then we continue to interact with that image, not with the real enemy. When we kill members of the enemy, we are actually playing a video game in our minds. And in this video game, there's an internal representation of the enemy that is devalued to the maximum, to the extreme, dehumanized, demonized, etc., etc. And this is exactly what happens in the mind of a narcissist. The narcissist converts people, converts external objects into internal objects. Then the narcissist either idealizes this object or devalues this object. But in any case, the narcissist continues to interact with the object, not with the person that they gave rise to the object. So we could say that war is a narcissistic activity. Absolutely. It's about narcissism. No wonder that war is very antisocial, and there are many psychopathic behaviors in war.
Yes, absolutely. Sam, always brilliant talking with you. Are you still? I just wanted to check how you are. I wanted to say, although it's a very troubled times, happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
And have you been able to get back to Israel, or you're still?
No, I haven't been there I haven't been there for too long. I intend to go back next year, hopefully when the fighting abates. I served in the Israeli army for 3.5 years. I was in infantry and then in the Air Force. So I know war intimately, including urban warfare. I've been involved in urban warfare. I know war intimately. There is no more hideous spectacle than war. All these values that are attributed to war, that's post facto nonsense. War is dirty and ugly. Dirty and ugly, period. There's nothing else there.
Sam, thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Always fascinating to talk with you and get another point of view and get people thinking. Sam Vaknin there, professor of clinical psychology. And maybe when you read a newspaper report, when you see those pictures, having heard what Sam had to say, maybe you can stop us thinking about them and us and everybody being the same. It's interesting. One of the things that I read was really good was that studies shown that when you start thinking about, here we go, there are people whose own family members have been taken hostage who don't want to recreate the same suffering on the other side. Expressing concern for the humanity of all, even when you yourself have dealt with immense suffering, is to see others as human. And indeed, we've had many of those people on our show, and I will continue to bring those voices to you. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Thank you for joining me. More than 8.6 million people, that's 1 in 5 adults, are now prescribed antidepressants annually. Additionally, the average duration of time that a person spends taking an antidepressant has also doubled between the mid-2000s and 2017, with around half of patients now classed as long-term users. Well, members of the new Beyond Pills all-party parliamentary group, that's experts, patient representatives, this week have urged health leaders to reverse the rate of antidepressant prescribing. In an open letter to the British Medical Journal this week, they said that a pill for every ill must stop, and they called for, amongst other things, a national 24-hour prescribed drug withdrawal helpline and website. One of the things that there's lots and lots of facts and figures here, but experts blame over-medicalizing issues such as loneliness for the steep rise, with unnecessary drugs putting patients at risk of harm while failing to tackle the root cause of problems. For instance, one study shows that 69% of diagnosed depression in older people was of mild severity, and another that those taking antidepressants, of those taking them, 26.4% reported mild depressive symptoms should they be prescribed this drug. But why is it such an issue? Well, the millions that it costs the National Health Service, and I've got it here somewhere, it's absolutely extraordinary. And for many people, although they're not physically addictive, they can be psychologically addictive. It means that it doesn't deal with the underlying problem. Now, I've got to say, one of the messages that I've just had in here, antidepressants. Hi, Trisha. Please don't demonize those of us that rely on antidepressants to stay alive. I'd be dead by now if I wasn't on them. Please be cautious to say they're overused, as you just don't know. That's Stephen in York. Well, Stephen, I've been on antidepressants myself and come off them all too quickly. That was pretty awful, I must admit. This is, I don't think, it's not about everybody who's prescribing, had them prescribed, but they're talking about the number of people who, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow with Julia Samuel, a psychotherapist and expert on grief. How many people are prescribed antidepressants for grief? And it's horrific and awful, and I'm not trivializing what grief, long-term grief of losing a loved one or what have you, people go through, but ending up being on antidepressants year after year after year is probably not the answer. Some of us need short-term relief from depressive symptoms, but then you can't get to see your doctor. Your talking therapies are mentioned. Try and get those if you're lucky, and people end up on them for a very long time. So those are many of the issues. I'm waiting to speak to Professor Joanna Moncrieff. Now, the reason I want to speak with her, she's from the University College of London. She's one of the signatories of the letter that I just mentioned, very heavily involved in the Beyond Pills campaign, and author of The Bitterest Pills, the troubling story of antipsychotic drugs. Let's see if we can get her ready. I mean, how do you feel? Let me ask you there. Do you agree that maybe you're one of those people who was prescribed an antidepressant, and now you find that you can't really live life, or forgotten how to live life without it? Do you feel, and one of the phrases they use here is a pill for every ill. Do you feel that if you had access to other therapies, like talking therapies, like, gosh, there's so many different therapies, that maybe you wouldn't have to rely on antidepressants? And the reason that you have to take them is because there aren't those other alternatives there, because that's definitely one of the things that I want to talk to Joanna about. Additionally, there are now evidence-based objections to prescribing antidepressants for sufferers of chronic pain. That's another area where apparently the efficacy is very low, alongside evidence of disproportionate prescribing to women, older people, and those living in deprived areas. So are we using what some people might call a chemical kosh, or one pill suits all, when really as a society, if we had other things that we could offer people, that would go down? I'm hoping we can get Professor Joanna Moncrieff. Maybe we can get her on the phone if we can't actually get her on camera. Oh, she's ready. She's ready. Professor Joanna Moncrieff joins me now. And as I explained, she's University of College London and one of the signatories of the letter. Joanna, thank you so much for your time. Immediately, whenever I talk about antidepressants and overprescription, somebody says, and this message said, please don't demonize those of us that rely on antidepressants to stay alive. I'd be dead by now if I wasn't on them. Please be cautious. To say they're overused as you just don't know. Stephen in York. Well, you do know, because the signatories to that pill for every ill, as you put it, are some of the, I mean, I had a look through some of the most esteemed minds. And I know, because of being involved in mental health for so long, there are so many people that have kind of end up trapped on antidepressants for something that was the human condition, like grief, for instance. Like, I was prescribed them getting over a divorce. I didn't, in hindsight, need to be on them for as long as I was. I got off them, came off them too quickly. But just tell me what you mean, why you feel you've needed to highlight this issue.
So thanks for having me on, Trisha, and I'm glad I got on in the end. Almost 1 in 5 of the population of England are now taking antidepressants, and half of them end up on them on a long-term basis. And they are drugs for which we do not have brilliant evidence that they're very effective. And yet we know that they can cause some quite disabling side effects, not in everyone, of course, but in some people, including difficulty getting off the drugs, sexual side effects, which of course are very widespread, and sometimes, more severe side effects in a small group of people. It's only a small group, I would emphasize, but in a small group of people, they seem to make people, it can give people suicidal thoughts and maybe may even sort of drive people to try and harm themselves. And they can also, in some people, it seems, cause persistent sexual dysfunction, even when people have actually stopped taking the tablets. And these are all side effects that there's only really been sort of good evidence over the last few years. So they've been emerging. So, I think we're in a new world where we've realized how harmful these drugs can be for some people, and therefore we need to make sure that they, that they're not just given out willy-nilly, and that we approach depression in a different way if it's possible.
Why do you think they became, especially antidepressants, became the drug du jour almost? I mean, what is the explosion? I mean, I remember years ago doing a story about how a certain hotel, very upmarket hotel in Barbados, has 2 or 3 suites perpetually open for doctors, probably from the United States. Those who prescribe the most get the most rewards. So there have been enticements from drug companies. But what is it? I mean, all of the other things that we wish we could give people, like talking therapies and what have you, simply aren't there. If you're in need and you have to wait for 6 months, those 6 months you can decline very quickly. So what made them so popular? Was it because there was a lack of other money being put into alternative ideas, or, which is it, chicken and egg?
Well, I think a lack of alternatives is part of the story, but the biggest part of the story is a huge pharmaceutical industry marketing campaign that started in the 1990s, went on, for the best part of a couple of decades, that basically set out to change people's minds about the nature of our moods and our emotions, and persuade people that they were a disease, that they weren't an ordinary part of life that you could maybe get through, but they were a disease, and that you needed a medical treatment, particularly a pill, to put them right. And, the pharmaceutical industry had done polls, they'd found out how people thought about moods and emotions, and they set out to really change people's views about them, and change people from thinking, depression is a response to bad things happening, to divorce, to loss, to loneliness, etc., and to implant in people's minds this idea that it was caused by a chemical imbalance, which I showed and was on your show briefly talking about that, was never a proven, never an established fact at all. So a large part of the issue that we have now is that the pharmaceutical industry very successfully persuaded people to think of normal moods and emotions differently, and to see them as a medical condition. And of course, once they'd persuaded people that these were a problem, people went to see their doctors, and like you say, there really wasn't very much alternative on offer. I mean, we're quite lucky in this country in that we do have a national therapy service, so people can get therapy, which wasn't the case, a few years ago before the Talking Therapies initiative was launched. But there's still a waiting list for that. It's not something you can access the next day or in a few days. And in other places, people aren't so lucky. So, there may be no funded therapy available at all. So I do think it's partly a lack of alternatives, but I also think it's that we've been coached into thinking about depression in a certain way, and thinking about it as a disease that needs a medical treatment, rather than something that may be difficult, but maybe we can find our way through in the end, or that we can help each other get through.
But I mean, obviously, we're saying that there are some people who absolutely need them, but there's so many people that don't. And I always believed that if one used them, they were seen as a short-term stopgap to get you through a particularly difficult time. When you read that half the people who take them end up staying on them long-term, clearly, once you're into the mindset of, and you feel better because you don't have to think about the problem hasn't gone away, it's still there, but then you're reluctant to get off them, and then it's difficult to come off them. And then you become trapped in that cycle. One of the things that you ask for in this letter is a 24-hour sort of line and assistance to help people coming off. Do you believe, though, enough people want to come off them? Because the drug companies have done a pretty good job in medicalizing, quote unquote, normal human conditions. So is there the education for people about what is normal and what isn't normal? Is there enough of that to make people want to come off these drugs?
I think a lot of people, like you say, Trisha, get trapped on them, because you go to your doctor at your lowest point, and you start on the antidepressants when you're really low, and then a couple of weeks later, things have probably got a bit better in your life and you start feeling better, but you think it was the antidepressant. So then, of course, people are very nervous about stopping them. They think it's the drug that got them better. What we know about antidepressant effectiveness is they're not very different from a placebo. And if they help some people, it's probably because they have a slightly emotional numbing effect, which may be beneficial if people are really, really distressed. But like you said, that's a sticking plaster. It's not solving the ultimate problem. But I think people get trapped because they think, oh, it must be the drug that got me better, therefore I need it. And therefore people get very anxious about trying to come off the medication. And then, of course, if they try a bit and they get some withdrawal symptoms, the withdrawal symptoms
which are awful.
Often, yes, as many people say, but they often involve some mood symptoms that people might mistake for a relapse. So withdrawal very commonly can make people very anxious, and low as well, and fragile and tearful. It very typically makes people tearful. And so, of course, some people might think that they're starting to relapse if they're not aware that there's a withdrawal syndrome. And so for those reasons, as well as the fact that people often think that the drug helped them got better, people can become really nervous about trying to stop them. So hence, more and more people are just getting stuck on them for years on end. And the longer you're on antidepressants, the more likely you are to suffer from the adverse effects and the serious complications that you really don't want to suffer from, or most of them. So the more likely you are to suffer from, serious, difficult withdrawal symptoms that might go on for a long time, or this persistent sexual dysfunction. So I think.
But you've got a monumental task ahead. Taking on, it reminds me of taking on the tobacco companies in the early days of when we realised that smoking was killing as many people. I mean, do you believe, and I'm probably cynical, that governments with the lobbying and the drug companies and the might of the drug companies, I mean, as America is fighting with things like OxyContin, it's a really difficult message to get through to people because the drug companies have done this so well for so long.
It is, and there are one or two new antidepressants on the market, but most of them have gone off patent. So most antidepressants aren't being heavily advertised at the moment. But like I said, the drug companies have already done such a good job in changing people's thinking that like you say, it is very difficult to change people's minds. And now that we've persuaded everyone that they have, that they're ill and they need a medical treatment, it's even more difficult to actually fund and provide alternatives for people. So yes, there are lots of obstacles to changing the situation. But I think there has been a lot more conversations of this sort over the last few years, partly because of people who've had bad experiences with antidepressants, particularly with withdrawal experiences, which they weren't warned about and they weren't prepared for. And I think when you suffer from a withdrawal experience, you suddenly realize, gosh, I've been taking this, what I've been taking is a drug, and my body's not, it's changed my body. And that can start to worry people and start to give people a bit different perspective on antidepressants.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And we're just saying to anybody, if you're listening, don't immediately stop your antidepressants, because that's the worst thing that you can do. But one of the things you might be able to do is talk with your GP about, even if it's in 6 months, it's better than nothing, isn't it? 3 or 6 months, if you can get access to talking therapies or what have you, and start making that change. Professor Joanna Moncrieff, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Certainly, I hope, gets people thinking about that. We'll be back with a really contentious issue. Could it be that in the last translation of the Bible, some of the words were mistranslated, which led to a whole anti-LGBTQ vibe when it comes to Christianity? That's what we'll be doing next. Thank you for joining me. A lovely message from Dan in Kent saying, love this show, Trisha, because it raises uncomfortable questions. Well done to you and the team. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dan. And also on antidepressants, are pills curing mental health or causing it? Well, we all have mental health. Are they curing mental illness? That's chicken and egg. I think people who there's a whole range, isn't there, from mental distress to mental illness. It's a tricky one. There's the number on the screen if you want. You'll say 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk to 87222. You can X at talkTV. When I saw this story, I said, we've got another message. Hi, Trisha. Antidepressants, I beg your pardon. Several years ago, I felt I needed them myself. My doctor prescribed them for me, but after a very short time of taking them, I stopped. The tablets made me feel so exhausted I could barely put one foot in front of the other. I felt stupefied. I get what you mean. Thank you for that. I think a lot of people would, there's different experiences, different people. So when I saw this story, I was like, wow. And as you know, usually on a Sunday, I look at faith issues. So I'm always sort of keen in. I told you I read all sorts of newspapers and what have you, including faith ones. Now, here's a good question for you. What if the way we approach LGBTQ people, thanks to, if you happen to be a Christian, through the Bible, what if that's all based on a mistake, basically? There's a film out at the moment called 1946, the movie. And the film hinges its premise on the fact that the word homosexual first appeared in the Bible in 1946 in an apparent mistranslation of the ancient Greek words malakoi, defined as someone effeminate who gives themselves up to a soft, decadent, lazy, and indolent way of living. And to talk more about this is a film that talks to a lot of intellectuals, a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and they look at how the mistranslation of certain words in the Bible have given license to a whole lot of people within the regions of faith to sort of cast out being gay or look down upon people who are gay, or even worse. Joining me now is a Christian, a gay Christian, not that it matters, Sharron Roggio, who's the director of the 1946 the movie, which I'm definitely going to go and see. Sharron, thank you so much for joining me. So, I didn't think about that. The fact that the Bible was translated again in 1946, and given the way people thought and all of those things that they brought to that, plus probably mistranslations. And there you have, as far as many people would argue with you, set in stone a whole lot of values that might be hinged on something that's incorrect. Just tell me about the words that could have been or may have been mistranslated.
Sure. So as you mentioned, malakoi, which would be the passive participant in this act, and the arsenokoitai, the active. And, you know, the issue of how the Bible became weaponized and used against the LGBTQ community is really what is the thesis here around that verse in 1 Corinthians 6:9-10. Because we know homophobia has plagued our reality for a long time. These themes are in alignment with patriarchy and misogyny and different things that we see play out through our culture. But what we've noticed in the film, when the word was first put in the Bible in 1946 in the Revised Standard Version, they wanted to modernize the King James Version. And so they were looking into the culture to see what can we do to describe these two Greek words, malakoi and arsenokoitai, and make it accessible for people. So they went back to the original Greek, as they should. And then, of course, they looked through other translations as it's changed over time. And that verse, 1 Corinthians 6:9, has gone through a plethora of changes, which gives us a clue that there's something difficult there, as Trevor Thompson, one of our scholars in the film, points out. And so Kathy Boldock and Ed Oxford were the first to really ask the question, who made this decision and why? And so we follow them to Yale University, and we discover in the archives a series of letters. It's an amazing story of a 21-year-old seminary student who challenged the translation committee. He's like, the word homosexual doesn't belong here because the malakoi and the arsenokoitai are very different, two terms, and not necessarily a blanket statement condemning a group of people, as opposed to what's really going on in the text, which is an act that is an aggressive against a group, against someone else. It has violence, consequences, and harm associated with it, not loving, consensual, same-sex relationships. So that's really what's at play here.
Rocky, let's just show people a clip of the movie, which we've got. Here it is.
Thank you.
New Testament. I found that they had left their archives at Yale University.
I think we went through 60,000 documents. So I'm reading this for the first time.
Oh, this is exactly what we are looking for.
This is it. I was wrong, or I think I'm wrong, about what the Bible says. What is in the Bible is a behavior. It's a behavior that heterosexual people can do. Religion and politics get together.
There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war, for this war is for the soul of America.
Hey, sweetie. What you're doing is contrary to the Word of God.
The authority of the Bible is at stake.
How do we undo a lie that is so ingrained in our culture?
So, Rocky, coming back to you as well, Sodom and Gomorrah as well, around that, you know, and again, the way in which it was translated may not have been the original meaning.
Yeah, and so the word homosexual lands in those passages in the 70s. We also see how the word spread to modern translations. There were some issues, according to certain conservative perspectives on the RSV. Like, for example, they took the virginity of Mary away because they called her a young woman, which is actually, Trisha, original to the Greek. And so they were an academic team that did a really good job. But then there were three other modern English translation committees that wanted to make sure, you know, some of them wanted to make sure that Mary was still a virgin and other things. And so they created their Bibles in the 70s. They all used the RSV as their root text, not knowing these letters existed, not knowing the translation committee already admitted they made a mistake and were ready to change it. And they couldn't change it to 71. But of course, there were no internet, no one's talking to each other, all this stuff. So we did feel it was important to break down some of the other, what we call clobber passages, which Sodom and Gomorrah is one of them, where the word homosexual ended up being inserted into 6 different passages in the 70s. And we still see in those translations assumptions. We don't see malice until the 80s, when the moral majority amplified homophobia and started to use these verses and use the Bible and start preaching these verses on the pulpit. And it's in alignment with when the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder. Yeah. So once society deemed us well, that's where we see the church taking over and it becoming a moral issue for the first time in history. Prior to that, it was more of a medical issue and things of that regard. So it's fascinating work. I'm so grateful for Kathy and Ed, who have done this work, and look at the footage they shot at Yale University. How amazing. And then I was able to tell the story.
I was going to say, Rocky, you must have got a lot of pushback. I mean, this is very damning. Even just the idea that the words could have been mistranslated would render null and void so many politicians, especially in the US, where they closely align. I mean, what you're seeing with book burning and, you know, all of the hatred, and it being the hatred against LGBTQ being aligned with godliness and what have you. So those people would feel incredibly threatened by this.
Well, we have received hundreds, and there's, I'm sure, thousands of pushback in forms of radio shows, TV, sermons, podcasts, articles. People have written books about our movie, The 1946 Project, and why it's wrong. And so, yes, there's a big threat. And it's frustrating because all of those people have not seen the movie. And it would be different if they then did commentary against the film after seeing it. I think it would hold a little bit more integrity. It also would hold a little bit more, you know, just showing the work. And so one of the points, too, in the film is it was 2 lay people who asked the question, why? And they were the ones who went to Yale University. And these archives had been sealed since the 60s. So the assumption that that camp has everything right and they don't need to look at any new information is just frustrating. And so what we wanted to do, besides the fact that our loved ones, who are often our oppressors, who believe these things, like our parents and our sisters and things like that, we wanted to make a film which we did succeed on in doing an empathetic, relational, gracious approach to a real mistranslation without pulling the rug out from anyone who, you know, takes the Bible. We take the Bible very seriously. And so you are allowed to hold on to your faith, but you're also allowed to explore new information and be changed. We've changed so many times. And the church has been wrong on so many things. Galileo was put in jail because of the clobber passages against him, and he died in jail. And left-handed people, women, people of color, we've seen slavery. We've seen us make decisions that are good for humanity and actually more in alignment with a gospel message, if we're going to, you know, be biblical. But, you know, and so we made a film for everyone to go.
I was going to say as well, yeah, in your film, you use your personal experience as well as a gay Christian. And, you know, and I think I'm yet to see the film, but just having a look at the shorts there, I think that's very powerful. But how difficult was it to do those scenes with your dad?
It was challenging to go back and relive those moments. One of the great things about my dad, not only that he was willing to be in the film, and so for anybody who hasn't seen it, he's a non-denominational minister. He still believes being homosexual is a sin, and he's not in alignment with what I'm doing with the film, although he would say he's proud of me. But him being able to be in the film afforded us an opportunity on how we can still do relationship, even if we don't agree with one another. Mm-hmm. And for me, I went back because I wanted to be someone that is known and not just spoken of. So I ran away and there's no relationship, but I've got nieces and nephews and sisters and cousins, and it's just a shame for us not to know each other. And so it's kind of like that don't ask, don't tell. We don't talk about it. I'm going to go home for Christmas and we're going to bake cookies and it's going to be so fun and I can't wait to see my family. But there's still a part of me that I can't share. And so we were able to show that on camera. It's like, we have this relationship, but you don't really know me. And it's so hard for a person who comes from a faith background that has those challenges because of the ideology and the theology
because of this.
Yeah.
So Rocky,
we're hoping
just
that we
quickly,
can
because we've run out of time. So people can see the movie. It's called 1946, the movie. I do recommend that they have a look at that just to open their minds, and that's what I do this show for. It has been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I wish you all the very best, and I hope some people open their minds. And as I say, on Sunday, we often do a faith panel, what